having been in an established firm, you see best practice, you learn so much, but there are typically a lot more layers of bureaucracies, and your ideas kind of gets lost or your influence kind of gets diluted as they work up the ranks, if you will.
Mm.
And that's the way that traditionally a bigger corporation are structured, because they kind of have to, because they need to be organized. They have many micro functions, mini micro businesses to be able to operate at such a large scale level. Coming from there to a smaller firm where I can draw from the best practice of the bigger firm, established firms, and know what good looks like, I can take that in and build that for Monoova.
Hi, I'm Renata Bernardi, and this is the Job Hunting Podcast, where I interview experts and professionals and discuss issues that are important for job hunters and those who are working to advance their careers. So make sure that you subscribe and follow, and let's dive right in. My guest for this episode works for a startup that was awarded Fintech Organization of the Year in 2022 here in Australia. Monoova is a leading B2B payment solution provider in the growing and exciting world of fintech startups. And the reason why I'm interested to bring startups as a topic of conversation on the Job Hunting Podcast is driven by demand. As an example, the day before I interviewed Emily Zhang, who is their Chief People Officer at Monoova, I had a full day of coaching sessions with clients who were either starting a new job at a startup or keen to include startups in the mix of consideration as they navigate their way out of jobs they're unhappy with. As most of my clients are mid to senior level professionals, they often come up from a more structured organization. So the high growth, nimble, and high energy world of startups is both alluring and a bit scary for them. When preparing for my chat with Emily, I was looking for her guidance as to how you can decide if startup is for you and how to navigate the different culture that you may find if you do what she did, which is go from a global consulting firm or a large bank and take the risk of joining a startup and helping them grow. What I got was way more than what I bargained for. Emily has an interesting personal story to tell that I hope will resonate with many of you. This is an episode that I know many of my clients will enjoy listening to, and I hope that you do too. When you listen to this episode, you may listen to a few words that you're not familiar with, so I want to give you some background on that so that you can go to the episode show notes and find more information. For example, Emily mentioned that she worked at Yellow Folder, and in fact, I interviewed the CEO and founder of Yellow Folder, Julian Doherty, a couple of years ago. I'll have that episode linked below. I also mentioned Karen James, who is a former general manager at the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, a bank that Emily worked for. So I mentioned Karen and I interviewed her for this podcast. So I'll have a link to it below. I also mentioned the importance of alumni in career progression. I brought it up because Emily mentioned how important it was that she was connected with the KPMG alumni. So I did mention that we had recorded an episode about this, and that's episode 178. There will be a link to it below as well. And finally, if you want to learn more about working in startups, I also interviewed the co founder of Mindset Health. And that's another great Aussie startup on its way to becoming a unicorn. And the episode is number 47. I will have a link to all of these episodes, like I said, in the show notes. So make sure that you subscribe to the Job Hunting Podcast. There's just so many great episodes that we have already recorded and so many other great ones to come. This episode is brought to you by Talent Predicts, the state of the art strengths assessment test that all my private and group coaching clients have used to identify their sweet spots or career DNA. That's the combination of their top talents, their career drivers, and their personal values. So, if you want to know if you can potentially thrive in an entrepreneurial environment like a startup, Talent Predicts can be a great tool to help you with that. You will know what your talents are, learn about your strengths, and have this comprehensive personal report describing when and where you are at your best, areas that you can trip up if you're not careful. It is so much easier to talk about your strengths at job interviews when you have a Talent Predicts report at hand to prepare for those interviews. So if you want to do your Talent Predicts assessment with me, go to my website, renatabernardi.com. That's RENATABERNARDE.com. And there will be a service there called Find My Talents. And that's the Talent Predicts assessment. So go to the episode show notes if you couldn't quite get the link to my website, and you will find the Talent Predicts assessment ready for you, and you will have it in no time. Okay, so let's get to know Emily Zhang. I begin by apologizing to her about some technical issues we had as we were recording, but I hope you won't even notice them. Here we go. Look, I'm sorry that we had all these technical issues. That's not a big problem for us. We try to
Okay,
do the best possible
of course.
sound possible, but if we can't, I think that the value of having guests like you on the podcast is it brings some, well, for me, I do many of the episodes by myself, right? So it becomes really boring, but it also adds some
Yes.
color and flavor to the conversation. Most of our guests are recruiters. They are talent acquisition managers. They are CEOs. They're, people that are interested in recruitment and selection of candidates and work in this field and bring to the listeners a whole bunch of intelligence that I can't do by myself. So that's wonderful, Emily, that you accepted the invitation to speak. And I know it's something different for you. So I really, really value you attending and coming
Thank
on
you.
board to talk. The first thing that I'd love to hear from you is for you to share with the listeners a little bit of a career story, because one thing that fascinated me when I saw your LinkedIn profile is that you have moved from sectors and you have moved industries, and that's something that a lot of job hunters want to do as well. So I'd love to hear how you ended up in a startup fintech after working in government, after working in big banks. Tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about how that happened.
Yes, I have a very interesting background, little bit of, my personal career development goals, but also a bit of luck and opportunity. You know what they say, the opportunity is a mix between the luck and your, personal achievements. And it's a bit like that. So I started off out of uni where I graduated as an organization psychologist. So I wanted really to get into any kind of people focused business. And I knew that, the big four consulting, being the Deloitte, KPMG, PwC, and EY, was where I wanted to be. They do a lot of people focused change management, behavioral change management, organization design, and that is exactly where I wanted to be. But it took me a very long time to get there, as you can imagine. I wasn't exactly a grad, but also it's very competitive. So I started when I left my master's, I started work at Yellow Folder, which was talent research, executive management, but with a real people and org design focus on the way you recruit. It's not very traditional. So that was terribly interesting. Got a lot of insight into how business was set up and how they developed their capability from a structure point of view. So from there, I was lucky enough to have been in touch with a lot of recruiters across the big four, but also a director, now partner at KPMG, and got introduced and presented what I wanted to do and my experience and background in org psych and my passion for people. And there I was. I spent 3 or so years at KPMG, learned a hell of a lot, have met and continued to be part of a very, very talented group of consultants, ex-consultants. Continued to be working with them across my career. I still very much in touch with all the partners, and we have a very, very close knit of alumni, KPMG alumni, that we still bounce off ideas and try to solve problems together. So it's been terribly rewarding being at KPMG. Learned so much and met some incredible people. And then I somewhat became a mum, single mum. So needed a change because consulting at the time pre-COVID took a lot of, traveling, and you had
Yeah.
to be on site with the clients a lot. And I was still transitioning back as a single mom.
Mhm.
And so I had some conversations with recruiters and knew that I wanted to continue my work in change management. I wasn't done learning what I can do there. And at the time, pre-COVID, a lot of the Australian Big Four banks, being CBA, ANZ, Westpac, and NAB, were looking for change managers to help them uplift their systems and process in terms of the risk remediation that came out of the Royal Commission recently. And so I was based in Melbourne at the time, and got a call saying CBA had a extremely exciting opportunity as a change manager in the risk remediation stream, exactly what I was looking for. But of course, it was in Sydney.
Yes,
So
of course.
never was that in my sight. Never was that really an interest of mine to move, especially being a single mum. Everything and everyone was back in Melbourne. But a couple of conversations later with the manager and a very persuasive recruiter, here I am in Sydney.
Yes. Oh, that's fantastic. I love that story so much. A couple of things that were highlights for me was when you mentioned the importance of the alumni after you left KPMG. And we
Yeah.
actually recorded an episode exactly about that, about keeping in
No.
touch with alumni and how strong they're becoming in the corporate world, especially in the consulting area, but also big corporates now have great alumni. And that really resonated with me, and I want to people that are listening, I want them to go to the episode show notes and have a listen about the importance of connecting with alumni. And the other thing that you mentioned was, CBA. Now, we recorded an episode with Karen James. I don't know if you've crossed paths with her, but she created that sort of women in leadership program inside CBA that was quite sort of well known and had some amazing retreats pre-COVID that women could attend up in
Yeah.
Noosa or
Yes.
Byron Bay. And Karen and I kept in touch, and I recorded an episode with her a few years ago. And such a great place to work, I find, for women. Every time I used to go to the Commonwealth Bank, I went there quite often at the head office. I felt a good vibe.
Yes. Yes. Well, they have a brand new. So when I started, we were still based in the CBD here, but then they moved to South Eveleigh office, which is a brand spanking new. It was all about collaboration. There was hubs and there were eateries, and it was like a mini Google office, if you will. And
Yeah.
it was a great place to work. They were
Mm,
very inclusive, obviously, and they were very understanding of our, work-life balance. Being a single mum, going back in full time, I felt very supported. But
mm,
and then to finish off that, where I am now, of course, a couple of years into the role, I got a call from an ex-KPMG partner saying she's working with an investment group which is helping my current company, Monoova, scale and separate from their parent group, but they're going out as a startup. They are going to expand. They're doing incredible things in the financial tech industry in the way of payments, and they are looking for a CPO, a Chief People Officer. So the interesting thing is, I've actually never done HR as such. So that was a completely transparent from the start. Having a conversation with our CEO, Christian, that was very much laid down as a first topic I want to talk about, because I had never done HR, but I've never ran an HR operations team. But we had worked with HR business partners and worked with HR team extensively through all my career. So we knew how good looks like. But have I led a team or, led an operation? No. But they wanted someone that was strong in the people and culture development piece, the talent retention and attraction, the recruitment strategy piece, and also just in general strategy and org design. So, which is obviously something that I have strength in, which I've done before. And so I think everyone took, it's a sliding door moment. Everyone took a risk on both sides. Very stressful for me for the first few months, finding my feet. I was feeling a resource gap that probably should have been filled months before. So as you can imagine, as soon as I landed, everyone had something for me to assist with and support with, as well as implementing a HR system across the board for Monoova, separating from the parents group, recontracting everyone, and just transitioning everyone over in the most fair and equitable way from Moneytech to Monoova. And so it was an incredible journey at the start because I obviously didn't have a team at the time. But here I am again.
That's
It's even,
impressive. Yeah.
yes,
Emily, I didn't pick up on the HR experience. I picked up on you changing from a big bank to a startup, a fintech
yeah,
startup. And I thought that was already, such a big risk for you and a
yeah,
challenge, but it's sort of kind of there are layers there, right? And I'm super interested. One thing that I picked up when you're describing Yellow Folder was the org structure and that
yes,
sort of knowledge and understanding of that. Does that help when you're in a sort of high growth demerger startup as well, where you need to kind
yeah.
of figure out what the best org structure is moving forward?
Absolutely. I think what the skills and the work that we did at Yellow Folder helped me to resolve the problems that we have. Well, as we grow and scale, we're always going to have, solutions. We're always going to be looking for solutions to mature and improve. But the skills that I took from that is always benchmark and always consider what others are doing, whether they're competitors or they are an amazing organization and how it works and what works for them. So I take that into everything that I do here at Monoova to conduct that empirical research and bring in options for the leadership team and the board to consider what would work for Monoova and the pros and cons. So yes, that was extremely valuable. But I think that is the approach to everything that we do is cut the fat, get to the point and seek, options
Yeah.
that we can tailor to what we need because we are a unique business in a way, it being a startup fintech in this environment, in being payments.
Mm.
We don't have that many competitors, but we have a long way to go to be absolutely profitable and to be global.
Yeah, that's so interesting because when clients of mine, and just yesterday I had this conversation with a client that just joined a startup, tech, not fintech. And the first thing that she noticed was the org structure and the
Mm,
reporting lines or lack of, and she's still
yes.
finding her feet. And she started with another colleague, and she's kind of like, she's enjoying it. She's like, okay, this is different. This is
Mm,
interesting, not used to this. And the colleague is not taking it so well, just that nimble, sort of super flexible, especially because in this case, they were product managers and program managers, so the two women I'm talking about. And I think that they are so used to a highly structured matrix
yes.
environment. This is your reporting line. This is, you're partnering
Yes.
with,
Everything's
and
ready-made.
yes, yeah, startups definitely wouldn't have such a structured environment for them, right?
No.
Yeah.
Yes, and
Let,
then
let me get my dog out of the office. Give me
oh, sure.
this is the charm, Jackie,
Yeah.
stop.
I've got a little one as well. I've locked him in in the bedroom.
Go with Daddy. He heard my husband arriving and he's
Yes.
complaining. He's actually not mine, Emily. I'm dog sitting for my neighbor, but he's like
Nice.
adopted. Yeah,
Oh, that's nice.
he's going to be with us for a month. So
Oh, wow. Okay.
I know. Yeah, no. I take dog sitting really seriously. If you're ever
Oh,
moved
I
to
wish you were in
Melbourne,
Sydney. I wish you were in Sydney. We're
I know.
constantly away and our little Yorkie gets palmed around a lot.
So yes, I think, for some of the people listening who are in sort of established bricks and mortar, kind of more traditional institutions, and have this dream of, okay, oh, I'd love to work for a startup. I can think of quite a few of my clients who have that idea of,
Mm.
the fintech world. What are the things they need to look out for, and see if they have the strengths and the career drive to actually embrace the change?
So from where I am, I can speak from having been in a small consulting firm, a global, big four consulting firm, having been in small organizations like now, but also established at CBA. And there are pros and cons to both. And at the end of the day, it's a bit of your drive, a bit of resilience, and how much influence you like in your role. We always talk about autonomy. I think everyone is across the board, doesn't matter if you're a big business, small business, autonomy is there. But how much influence you have in your role is a different story. So having been in an established firm, you see best practice, you learn so much, but there are typically a lot more layers of bureaucracies, and your ideas kind of gets lost, or your influence kind of gets diluted as as they work up the ranks, if you will.
Mm.
And that's the way that traditionally a bigger corporation are structured, because they kind of have to, because they need to be organized. They have mini micro functions, mini micro businesses to be able to operate at such a large scale level. Coming from there to a smaller firm where I can draw from the best practice of the bigger firm, established firms, and know what good looks like, I can take that in and build that
Yeah.
for Monoova. So that has been really helpful for me, for what the best practice I've seen. We can bring it in, and as we bring in more talent and resource from bigger corporations who are in the same boat, that they are, you kind of get lost of the purpose of what they're doing. They're coming into startup to make a difference. Everyone is rolling up their sleeves. Everyone's bringing in external ideas, best practice to make Monoova grow. And that's what's so exciting. I mean, exhausting at times, being a such small firm, is we all get to put in ideas and work out what's best, and we all have a direct influence into how Monoova scales, which is terribly
Mm.
exciting. But we have to be dedicated to the cause of it, the business, and each other, to build things from scratch. It
Yeah.
takes a lot, and take everyone on the journey. And we have, resources, we have talent that inherited from the older Money Tech parent group. We have new resources. So it's finding the balance between what works, for someone that has been in that family business for such a long time, and for those that's come from the big established firms that are kind of frustrated by the way we're doing things, because as we slowly scale and
Yeah.
improve, there's going to be teething periods.
Yes.
But you need resilience more than anything. You need to be
Mm.
flexible both ways. You need to work for a company that values you as an employee, but you need to give back that flexibility as well. I'm a single mum, full-time single mum, and with everyone back in Melbourne. But the balance that I have is, sometimes I do need to go and do a Mother's Day breakfast, or go into school to do something, parent teacher interviews or whatnot. But I can pick things up at night, and that's a flexibility that I do
Mhm.
enjoy. It's not for
Yeah.
everyone, but having that freedom to be able to do that, it means a lot.
It works for you. One of the things that I find can be a really big issue and a friction for onboarding new people into startups from a coach perspective, right? Is when they realize that the lack of resources, that they are
Mm,
not able to kind of delegate and sometimes not even escalate some of the things that are happening. People need to have that autonomy and take that responsibility and get their hands dirty as
mm,
well. And I always remind my clients that they also have the ability to influence where the growth is going.
yeah.
And if that they feel it's time to add resources, that they can put the case forward, which sometimes in big organizations you kind of it get lost in translation. They don't feel like they have that opportunity. But in a startup world, you have those sprints, right? You have the
Yes.
sprint and you can influence where it goes. How do you feel this is best done by people that are on the ground and that they feel like there's an opportunity here for additional resources to be added to improve the performance of a project or a team? How
In
is
terms of someone in a startup or
yes, or somebody in a startup, let's say they've joined the startup,
yeah,
they're
okay.
either an engineer or a project manager or
Yeah.
and then they think, "Look, this is actually not going forward, not because I can't do it, but because there isn't the resources aren't here."
Yeah, okay. So in everything, so what you just spoke of, the joys of being in a smaller company is being able to influence and being able to ask a request and being heard. But also, the challenges of a smaller company as we scale is the balance between investments and cash flow,
Mhm.
profit revenue. So as we scale, we put in dedicated the money into the resource, but now we need to catch up in terms of how we scale as a business revenue growth. So always the conversation, anything that we do in terms of initiatives, benefits, resources, anything that has material commercial impact, we need to think of it as how do you set up the business case for it. We do have a board that we closely work with, and every month as a CPO, I write my own chief people officer report on everything to do with people. What is the spend, turnover, the productivity? Everything needs to make sense in terms of how does that translate to revenue. So you
Yeah.
can ask for a person, you can ask for a resource, but what does that mean? Why are we doing that? What do we need? Why are we doing that? And what does it mean for the business? I think anyone in a startup business, but I think in any case, you know, in any change that we are trying to initiate, in any resource that we're trying to ask for, you always think of the business case and how does that translate into
Yeah.
value for the business and you.
Yeah. Yeah. And come up with a good business case to put forward, right?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
business case is very important. It's going to be something that you'll be doing for the rest of your career.
Yeah. Listen, let's say somebody really wants to work for the startup and it's now time to sort of look into it and start doing their research. Most roles advertised, and I'm not just saying where you work at Monoova, but I'm just sort of in general. Do you
Mm.
find that there's a lot of networking going on and that they bring people like they brought you with a phone call and, more of a
Yeah.
personalized way? How is it happening, do you see it?
So, well, I was lucky enough that I wasn't actively looking for a startup. Like for
Mhm.
me, I'm quite contrary to myself. I'm a risk taker, but also I'm risk averse. So,
Yeah.
I took the risk, but at the time I was like, oh, do I stay in a, established larger firm where there is security and there's all these benefits and I know how things are going to work out? Or do I take the risk of going to a startup situation where I don't know what the runway looks like, but there's a lot of promise of it and there are good people backing it, there are
Mhm.
promising investments. But for people that are looking to get in startup, it is the networking. I think that is always paramount in everything we do. Have the conversations with the people that are in the know of what's happening. Some of these startups are forming with you need the people in there to build the business. So they're already forming the back end, but you may have never heard of them. So, keep track of the startup daily newsletters of what's happening, read the articles, get on the podcast, and I think Startup Daily has their own podcast as well.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and keep your finger on the pulse with like Stone and Chalk and Hub and all of that, those startup networks, because yeah, I think that's where you'll see some of those news and make those connections, and it's a word of mouth, you know
Mm.
leverage the people, the contacts that you have that are in investments and private equity and capital groups.
Yeah. At the time of the recording, though, as we have this chat, I noticed that there are two roles advertised by Monoova on LinkedIn, and they're pretty standard roles. One is legal counsel, and the other one is
Mhm.
risk management. Do you expect them to be filled out by people that have startup experience, or
Not
do you have
necessarily.
no?
We
Mm,
actually, well, at the moment, there's a lot of shift in the big banks, as they are realigning their profit margins, etc. So we are seeing a lot of candidates coming from big banks, established groups, not necessarily startups, and the questions from me when we do the interview is, why do you want to move from a big to a small? And I paint the picture quite realistically of what to expect. Some of the challenges that you don't have now, you will have here. Being able to be resilient, being flexible, and being patient as we mature and mature our processes, systems, and the way we work, because it's not established. We will continue to evolve, and it will continue evolving because we're scaling so quickly. At the moment we're focused on national, but then it's global. Things are moving all the time. We're still writing SOPs for certain businesses because we don't have them, because that's what the startup is.
yeah,
You're a bit of reactive. uh, you it's always your 80% in reactive, 20% proactive, but you're wanting to move to 80% proactive and 20% reactive. So it's a
sure.
constant battle. But
And Emily,
very rewarding.
yes. When we were exchanging emails, you mentioned that the interview process is very unstructured or somewhat unstructured. I can't remember the exact
Yes.
word you used.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're comparing this with other places that you've worked. And I know that this is very standard in the startup world, right? So, do you think that that actually is already a good sign for the candidates as to what to expect? Don't expect things to be too structured here because this is a startup.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yes, correct. I mean, it's a bit of both. It's the fact that we probably haven't got the resource to structure like a three-stage interview with testing or all of that, but at the same time we don't want to be doing that. It's And depending on the function and the team, the ask is different. So in our sales team, they will be asked to set up a sales strategy or sales model, or demonstrate how they can scale or strategize on growing our domestic market, for example. But for risk, it'll be very different. It's all about what they've done, how they've problem solved, alerts previously, how can they translate what they've done in the big banks to what we do here and what to expect. And legal as well. It's less structured. No one has a set remit in the team. Everyone is across all the contracts, all the APRA asks, all the ASIC demands. Everyone is across everything. So what I hear is people get to learn a lot more, but yes, you are doing everything.
Mhm.
But you get to learn a lot quicker, obviously, being hands-on. But
Yeah.
it can be very challenging in terms of managing priorities.
Yeah. For somebody who then joins a startup, do you think that the 90 days format of getting ready and sort of easing yourself into planning and strategy, do you find that that is still applicable to a startup world, or is there some sort of other way of doing this that's more aligned with the
Yeah,
culture?
I think the 90 days will definitely be condensed a little. It's not because we don't dedicate time to onboard our staff properly, but
Mm,
because it's smaller, you get to have a one-on-one tactical onboarding experience and training at a much, faster and pointed environment.
mm,
So you get to be carried on to the training and the doing quite quickly, because we obviously need all our staff to be doing as much as they can, but at when they are ready.
yeah.
So yeah, we want our people to get their feet on the table, do the research. We give them all the training and all the resources that they need. But it's a lot faster onboarding process in terms of on the job learning,
I
because
agree. Yeah. No, just in general, like working with clients globally, I have found
Yeah.
that if you're joining a startup, yes, keep your 90 days books by your side. That's all fine, but you're not you're not going to
Invaluable.
no. And I work with CEOs of startups as well, and I know that when they're hiring, it's because they have an emergency, that it's hyper
Yes.
growth, right? And whoever they're hiring need to, hit the ground
Yes.
running
And
and
we needed them yesterday because
yes.
that strategy and plan sometimes changes. That's the beauty of it as well. It can pivot quite
Mm,
quickly. We can be very quick in reacting to what's happening out, in the macro environment or business environment. But at the same time, when that decision is made, it's like, okay, we need that person right now.
yeah.
So yes, so that's the pro and cons of it. Things can change very quickly, but also, some things don't change.
Yeah.
Continue because we're trying to fight resource between scaling and also getting it right. It's a bit of both. Getting the
Yeah.
BAU, setting up the house, but also how do we grow and, influence out in the market? How do we scale quickly? So it's both priorities that
Yeah.
we're looking for. There was another
And
point I wanted to make on that.
oh, go ahead.
The interview process. Yeah. So with the interview process, I'm always involved at some point. Obviously, we're not a big organization where there's structured HR first, the vetting. It's not always like that. Sometimes the reporting manager reaches out directly, you have that direct conversation, or they come from, networks. And then, but at some point, I come in and I paint the truth of what is expected. As I said, it's not going to be all roses. You have a
Yeah.
lot of influence and a lot of ability to take this career as far as you want to, but you will need to do a lot of self leading as well. We can put in the best practices, but sometimes we have pulled quite thin in terms of priorities and depending on what's happening. So when I prepare them, so when they start, it's usually the ones that are super excited to get going.
Mm,
So they actually don't, not the ones that want the 90 days settle in, they want to hit the ground running usually.
yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. And the other thing, and I don't know if you're familiar with the Netflix manifesto, but I I'm very a big fan of it. It was leaked a decade ago, and when Netflix was like of hyper growth, getting out of that sort of blockbuster scenario and going into what
Yeah.
it is today. Yeah, no, it's an interesting slide deck. It has over 100 slides, but I think it's kind of it was used for onboarding, but it was also an educational piece for the employees to understand that things change very quickly.
Yeah.
And you have
Yes.
to be ready for whatever change this may be. We could be acquired by somebody. We could decide to pivot
Mm.
completely, and all of a sudden, all of the work that you're doing disappears, and you have to be okay with it. And I think that that is a good slide deck reading material for my clients to understand what it means to work in an organization that's constantly trying to find its feet,
Correct.
right? And the importance of understanding that risk is okay. Like
Mhm.
you chose between, a
Yeah.
more structured organization and a startup with a little bit of risk that you found paid off. And I think that that's how people need to consider as well in terms of planning their career ahead, right?
Mm. Yeah.
When do you add the risk? So for example, when I think about what you said before, you can opt into it now after having had your kids, more probably now school age, like that's the right time. Whereas if they were too little, you know what I mean? Like you have to
Yeah. I
balance
don't
things off.
look,
Have-
if you looked at what I did since Alex was born, it sounds crazy. We probably moved 3 or 4 times, moved interstate away from everyone, went from KPMG to CBA in a different state. And then I took this job when Alex would have been 2. So
Oh
2.
wow. Yeah.
Yes, I took this job when Alex is 2, and knowing that, everyone all of my friends that are in startups and quite senior jobs like CEOs and whatnot, chief of staff, they're like, are you sure you want to do this? It's not CBA in terms of you're going to have a lot of influence, you're going to have a lot of, in that role, but it's tough. You'll be working nights, you'll be, sometimes I work 24/7, not 24/7, but you know what I mean? Like
I
you get
know.
6 hours sleep depending on what it is. You're like, do you want to do this? And I had one friend who was like, listen, Alex is young. You're a single mum. Don't do this to yourself. Don't do this to yourself. Spend some time with them. They're going to go very quickly. Don't miss out. You'll feel guilty about it. I took that in. I took that on board and I thought about it. But after meeting Christian, our CEO, who's Swedish, a male champion for females in tech, females everything, equity, I laid down my expectations as well. I will do everything for this business to succeed, achieve, and all our goals and objectives and what we plan to do. I'm part of now the fabric, but I also expect a level of trust for me to be able to sustain this life, this balance.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. And I think
I
these
love
days,
that.
yeah. And I think these days we're doing that much better. Everyone's competing against the work and life expectations. Work needs to fit into our lives now more than ever since COVID. COVID was the silver lining of what's been happening,
Yeah.
Seeing a huge shift
I
in the
love
way.
that. And having worked with hundreds of women now that, 70, 80% of the time opt for this other sliding door. What I
Yes,
have found, and there's research on this as well, is that when you get stuck in middle management or you get sort of stuck in that sort of what you believe is a safe environment for you because it's not too taxing on your family, you
yes,
actually have way more stress. You have less
yes,
options, potentially less money,
yes.
and way more stress. And the middle management and as well usually gets the hardest cut when it's restructure time.
Yes, correct. And they're being
Yeah.
pulled and pushed because they're in the middle
Yeah.
as
But
well.
when you're making the decision, Emily,
Mm.
not many women choose to do what you did, and there's not a lot of support as well,
Yeah,
in terms of family and friends saying, "Are you sure?" Because they wanna protect you, they love you, and they want you to do well. So,
yeah, of course.
usually family tend to everybody tends to play more conservatively. So,
Everybody
that
wants to
is
play safe, but
yeah,
unfortunately, I'm a risk taker in time. I'm always looking for that thrill. But also for me, the passion and the purpose is really important to me. I
awesome.
think everything else will follow once you get that right. It's not always easy, but for the last 18 months, I've never questioned what I was getting out of bed for or what I was doing. So yes, it's very rewarding in that sense. And I've got to keep the balance with, my personal life. So I'm very
Yeah.
grateful.
Well, lovely. You know what? I'm glad you're in Sydney. The weather here is horrible. Alex wouldn't want to be here.
It's
I
been
bet
very
your family now, they all want to move to Sydney with you.
yes, that would be great.
Listen, do you have any final advice to give professionals keen to transition into startup? Is there anything we haven't discussed that you might want to bring up?
All I want to say is I think it's important that people are fulfilled in what they do and they are true to themselves of what gets them out of bed. Work is going to be work doesn't have to be work. It's a huge part of your lives forever. I mean, until you obviously retire, but do what you like to do. There's always an opportunity to be doing what you like to do or being an organization that you're passionate about or doing a different role from what you're doing. Take that risk. Yes, as much as you can afford to.
Yes, lovely. No, I like that. Emily, thank you so much once again for finding the
Thank
time during
you.
the day. Now I feel even more guilty now that I
Oh,
know that you're a
don't
single
be
mom.
silly. Don't be silly at all. It's been a pleasure chatting it through.
Uh, Thank you. Thank you. I hope that you enjoyed this episode and that you keep in touch. Please subscribe wherever you found this podcast, and if you're inspired and motivated to keep going, check out other episodes. You can also learn more about my services as a career coach in the episode show notes and on my website, renatabernardi.com. That's RENATABERNARDE.com.